All right, so welcome to the Collaboration Superpowers podcast. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today, all the way from Austin, Texas, I have Aviva Pinchas. Aviva, you are the head of growth at a company called Parabol, which describes itself as your agile meeting co-pilot. I saw on the website. That's a very, very brief description. We'll get into that. And you work with a fully remote team there. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you today. There's a whole bunch we're going to go into, like asynchronous decision making and the way that you guys work. But let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Yeah, so I try to keep a very light and lean sort of virtual office. So the only things that I need to get my work done are my laptop, Google Chrome with my Parabol profile. I'm a big proponent of having separate Chrome profiles for your work and your personal, because it means you can actually turn work off. And I have no work apps and no notifications on my laptop. So I get nice separation. So basically just my laptop, Google Chrome, and noise canceling headphones if I'm traveling around.
Oh, okay. So super easy. You can set up anywhere. What about like external monitors or any of that? Or
yeah, so in the before times, before the pandemic, I would structure my day as like working in my home office in the morning and then going to a coffee shop in the afternoon. But over the past year, I've gotten much more like sedentary as I can't leave the house basically. So now I've got like a microphone and a webcam and an external monitor. And I have a treadmill desk also set up. So it's like a little treadmill and then just like a laptop stand on a stack of things. To sort of like emulate the same experience of being able to be in different kinds of spaces, even though I'm just in my house, I have different work environments.
oh, that's a very creative solution. So you've set up totally like, since you couldn't leave the house during the pandemic really, or couldn't go to different workspaces, you've set up different workspaces within your own home. And I really like the idea of separate profiles in Chrome. I have not heard that before, but that is a very smart thing. Are there other things that you do to separate your work and your life?
Yeah, I mean, I have the privilege of having my own office. So it's like a separate room in my house. And that's very important that I can like open and close the door and it's like a distinct kind of space. Yeah, I would say those are the main things. And then trying to keep regular hours. So I'm very, our team does not have my cell phone number. They can't text me. I will not generally answer anything on the weekends. I try to really both, it's important for me to have those boundaries, but I'm also trying to model it for the rest of the team that like, yeah, you should get to have a weekend and you should be able to not respond to something after hours when you're with your family or, taking care of the other things that you need to do. So, thinking a lot about like, where am I getting notifications? Where am I actually available? And where am I like really off of work is really important.
I see. And so was there anything that prompted this, or did you just start working remotely and you were like, oh, I'm going to do this work-life separation in the beginning? Or, I mean, was there something that happened where
Yeah.
you're like, I need this separation?
Well, there are a couple of things. So in my earlier in my career, I worked in an office at a nonprofit called United Way. And, we all had each other's cell phone numbers and people would text me. And I had my email on my phone also, which I don't have anymore. I don't have my work email on my phone. And when I left that job, I noticed that I would wake up and be happier. And it's not because I didn't like that job. It's because my previous morning wake up experience was I would open my phone and I would see all the notifications for the emails, and then I would see text messages from my coworkers. I tend to be a bit of a later riser, so I would get to work at 9, they would get to work at like 8:30. And so when I started my day, it like started in a panic. I'm already behind. There's all these notifications. People are talking to me about things, and you just sort of like rise in a panic. And then like, that's the rest of the day. And I was very lucky that my first remote work experience was working with WooCommerce and Automatic, where there's a lot of discussion about this kind of thing. Like, what is it like to work remotely and how are you setting boundaries? And I was basically inspired by my coworkers saying like, the boundaries are really important, and that when you're working in your home space, you don't have the privilege of like, I leave the space and I go somewhere else. So you have to create your own boundaries, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of where it came from. It's like not wanting to have that start your day in a panic experience, and then seeing other people model for me that you can set boundaries this way.
Yeah, I too am a late riser. And And yeah, when you're a late riser, that's the downside is you start the day and everybody's already started way before you. So you start a little bit, well, yeah, behind, but it depends, if you're with a global team, then maybe it's an advantage or, who knows. But indeed, separating work and life and keeping those boundaries surprisingly difficult to do. Easy to say, just like losing weight, like, oh, eat less and move more. Very easy to say, surprisingly difficult to do. So great tips on doing that.
Yeah, the losing weight analogy I think is really helpful. So like one of the things when I'm trying to eat healthier, one of the things I do is I put my snacks in a harder to get to spot in the kitchen, and I put like fruits and veggies like closer up. So same idea with remote work. Like if you don't want to be answering notifications and calls at midnight or at 1 a.m., make it hard to do that, right? I know if in order to be accessible to work, I have to like intentionally open the Slack app on my phone, or I have to open my Chrome browser. So I know that I'm making a decision to step into that place. And then if that's a frustrating experience, or if I'm like not really set up to respond to things at that time, I really only have myself to blame because I decided to step into that workspace.
Yeah. Right. And it's an intentional decision. And actually, you make a good point in that if we're a little bit more deliberate and intentional about our actions in this kind of way of working, we can save hours.
Yeah.
For ourselves. And I think the boundaries thing has come up a lot because especially throughout the pandemic, like not being able to be in different spaces is really rough. And so now that, we are able to move out, depending on where we are in the world, you are able to go out a little bit more than I think we've all recognized that boundaries are extremely important for that. Let's dive into Parabol because Parabol is a very interesting app. So I described it very briefly as your agile meeting co-pilot, but let's put it in your words. What's Parabol and what does it do?
Yeah, so we're a tool for agile teams to hold the kinds of meetings that they hold regularly. So primarily that's retrospective meetings and estimation meetings. There's a lot of ways that you could hold these kinds of meetings, from virtual whiteboards to some folks do it in Google Docs or in project management tools like Trello. In all of those spaces, the tool is created to do something else. So you're kind of moving it through the force of your will and usually the skill of the facilitator to serve the specific purpose of having that retrospective or that estimation meeting. The idea with Parabol is you as a facilitator don't have to shape the tool to that specific purpose. The tool already exists and creates the structure for you. So it should be a lot easier to run a high quality retrospective than it would be to do it on any other tool. And the meeting should be smoother. All of the things that are important about a retrospective are kind of like built into the tool. So the facilitator doesn't have to be as skilled, frankly, so you can open it up to more people facilitating. And also the facilitator doesn't have to kind of enforce as much power to facilitate. So they can actually focus more on the conversation and be more of an active participant in the conversation rather than like making sure that everybody's, looking at the right set of stickies or like moving things into the right columns. You can actually participate in the discussion.
And then the way it works then is you would open up the app, you would create, let's say you're doing a retrospective, you would create a retrospective and it then I just assume to choose the type of retrospective that you'd want. So maybe you want the sailboat or any of the others. And then what you invite people to then join.
Yep, that's exactly right. So as a facilitator, you would start the meeting, you would choose from templates. We have about 10 in the tool that are sort of the most popular ones. We're always adding new ones. And you also can create your own if there's something specific to your team. Our team always adds a kudos column to every retro. That's just a thing we do. And then once you choose the template, you are dropped into sort of the reflect phase. Reflections are anonymous by default, so you don't have to worry about people like not being able to speak as frankly because there's no repercussions. It's a completely anonymous experience. So you reflect individually, then move on to the group phase. The reflections are revealed. We do multiplayer grouping, which means that everybody on the team can group, which is great because it means that you as a facilitator aren't responsible for finding the patterns. The whole team is finding the patterns. So that's another way that you get just like a deeper sense of what the team in general is thinking rather than what is the facilitator thinking.
Right. And also it's interesting to see how others group things.
Yeah.
Rather than how you would group things. I was always surprising. Like, oh, I didn't even see that.
Yeah, absolutely. When somebody grabs your card and you're like, what, where did that? Oh, that's interesting. I didn't see that connection. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And so then I assume like all the notes and action items, everything is that's kept within the tool so you can reflect on it further. And you also have other integrations I saw with Jira and some other.
That's right. So after the group phase, you vote and then you discuss and you decide what kind of takeaway tasks you might have. So you're deciding that right in the meeting and creating those tasks right in the meeting. And then you can also send those to GitHub or Jira. So your work isn't sort of like siloed in one place. One of the things I find funniest about retrospectives is you spend all this time reflecting and writing these reflections. And then at the end of the meeting, all of your hard work goes in the trash. The stickies literally go in the trash and they're gone forever. That's not true with a tool like Parabol. You can always come back into that meeting. And at the end, we also send an automatic email to everybody with the notes from the meeting. So if you have team members that were out that day, they can see what the discussion was. And you yourself, if you're like, oh, what did that one thing that we decided to do, why did we decide to do that? You can go directly back in and remember what was the impetus for that decision.
So you're not only helping to facilitate the meetings that you're doing, you're also building sort of an information architecture of all the decisions that are being made or all the reflections that we've had over time. I mean, it could be a really powerful tool depending on how the data is set up to, go back and anyway, just having the history of going back and looking at what we're doing is also really powerful. Love that. So it's like, oh, you've got all your meeting minutes all in one place for every meeting that you've got. Now, Parabol is a fully remote team and you're global. How big is the team or the company?
Yeah, so when I joined, which was a year and a half ago, we were 5 and now we are 20. So big change over a year and a half. And we're truly global. So I want to say furthest east is we have folks in Poland, and furthest west is we have several folks on the west coast of the US. So that's kind of our spread.
Oh, that's quite a time zone difference there. You've got 9 or 10 hours from the West Coast to Poland, depending on where we are. So we'll talk about time zones in a second, because you've definitely got experience with that. But it sounds like you've gone from 5 to 20 people hiring during a pandemic.
Yep.
Okay, so what was that experience like?
So we have like a pretty weird hiring process, a very like purpose-built hiring process. And it's all about building trust with your team members before they join the team. We're a very transparent and non-hierarchical kind of organization. So from the first day that somebody joins, they have the power to change a lot, and they have the power to change how the organization itself works and the policies and decisions that we have. So that requires a lot of trust. And how do you build that kind of trust when you never meet somebody face to face? So we go through 4 stages. So we do a screening interview, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a general screening. We do a fit for role interview where they typically will have some sort of real experience jamming on a bit of work. So for marketers, we show you our actual metrics dashboard and say, like, this is what the situation is. What would you do, basically? And the intention is to see like what things stand out, what things get people excited, really how would they respond to the actual problems they'd have in the job. Then we do a fit for org interview, which is a panel culture interview. And that's super important for bringing in more folks across the team into the decision, because we don't really want it to be, we want you to build relationships across different teams. We don't want you to really just have a one-on-one relationship with your manager. It's a very fragile sort of system. We want you to feel connected to other people on the team, and we want them to be bought into this new candidate that's coming on. So that's the fit for org interview. And then the last thing, we do a batting practice, which is a paid trial project. So you join us on Slack, we give you access to a bunch of our tools, and you do real work. For most of the developers, the real work that they do in their batting practice ships before their first day. So You get to like really be part of the team and see what it's like. And it's a great sort of try before you buy kind of situation, because you get to see, what are we really like? Do you like the way that we give you feedback? Is it weird for you that you're doing the work very, very publicly? Does that make you uncomfortable? Maybe you don't want to join this particular band of weirdos that we are. You as a candidate get to make that choice. Yeah.
I mean, I think like a trial period for both the employee and the employer seems like a nice idea. And, I know that there's various aspects to it and stuff that can go wrong, but, I really like the idea of trying it on. Like, does this work for us? Because everybody's on their best behavior during the interview. It's like dating, right? You got to,
absolutely.
It's like, you got to get past the first few dates to really understand like who people are, what their quirks are and stuff. So yeah, you want to try it out. Okay. So that's a pretty intensive hiring interview. So it sounds like really good tips. What about onboarding? What does your onboarding process look like?
Yeah, well, so the benefit of doing the batting practice is that you get sort of onboarded before you join. So you get access to all the tools, you see what we're like in Slack and so on. And then when you join, so you have an onboarding buddy, which is typically your manager or the team lead that you're working with, and sort of a checklist of like, here are the things that we want you to do. The other cool piece about having the batting practice is that you have work already started to work on. So I think one of the things that's difficult when working remotely is having a sense of like, well, where's my ground? Where's my like foundation? And as a new employee, sort of jumping into the kind of fire hose of information and like seeing everything that's going on at the company, it's helpful to be able to just like pick up your trial project and be like, oh, I'm going to keep working on like that set of features, in that part of the code base. I'm familiar with that. Or as a marketer, oh, I'm going to take that email campaign and push it across the finish line. It's like a nice way to kind of gently start delivering value to the team, but also like feeling yourself like you are valuable.
I love it. And I'm sure you've had some experiences. Everybody has a certain percentage of people that it just doesn't work out. What are some of the reasons why it doesn't work out?
Yeah, I would say the most common is folks want a more like top-down or hierarchical way of decision making. I think the idea of flatness is really appealing, and then you get into it and you're like, oh, that's actually a lot of responsibility for everybody who works here. So we've had folks who are like, really wanting me or really wanting our CEO Jordan to like mandate this is how we're going to do sales now, and everybody's got to follow along. And that's not how we are as leaders. It's not the company that we're building. And so if you're uncomfortable in that sort of like, you as an employee make a proposal and you lead the experiment, and it might not be what we decide to do. If you want that more top-down kind of structure, we tend to be a pretty uncomfortable place.
Yeah, no, I can really relate. I worked for a company where it was completely flat. I mean, everybody was on equal footing, got paid the same, everything was flat. And there were some times when it was so frustrating because you just wanted somebody to make a decision.
Yeah.
Like you just wanted there to be a boss who would say how it was going to be, and then be like, fine, I don't agree with it, but at least that's how it's going to be. Like, at least I know that's how it's going to be. And when it's flat, you really keep going around and around and around on certain things. And it's just maddening. So yeah, downsides.
Well, so that's a great segue to talk about decision-making and how we do decision-making. So we do, I wouldn't describe us, people describe us as flat. I wouldn't describe us as flat. I would describe us as decentralized, which means that the decisions aren't always made by leaders or folks kind of at the top of the hierarchy. Decisions can be made across the organizations and often at the edges, folks who are, most directly working with customers and users who really should be making a lot of decisions because they have a lot of data. So our decision-making process is called consent-based decision-making, and it goes through a few phases. So first, there is a proposal phase. So someone proposes a solution to a problem that they see. And this is like an underappreciated and very powerful phase, in my opinion, because that's a really vulnerable thing to do as an employee, to say like, this is a problem. I see it. I believe this is a problem. And this is the solution that I'm proposing. This is my idea, right? Sharing your ideas is like a really vulnerable thing, but it also gives you a ton of autonomy and responsibility and power. So first you propose a solution. Then we do clarifying questions, which is the rest of the team asks you, what did you mean by this or that? And the intention there, this is an important phase because the intention there is to understand the proposal on its own terms. So maybe the person is making an assumption that I disagree with, but that's not my role in the clarifying questions phase. My role is to understand, where are they coming from? Why did they suggest this? Why did they think it's a good idea? If we have this like very complicated hiring process and this high bar for who's going to join us, then we can assume that everybody has good intentions and is smart and capable and should be trusted. So they have some reason why they're making this suggestion, and I need to understand it. And we sometimes say, you got to love it enough to hate it. So you got to really get the thing before you can criticize it. So that's what the clarifying questions phase is about. Then we go on to the reactions phase, which is where you get to have an opinion as the team and be like, I don't like this, or I like this, but I don't like that, or this solves completely the wrong problem. Like, this is the way you frame the problem is wrong, something like that. As a proposer, you just hear that feedback. You don't react to the reactions. The intention is just for everybody else to be heard. And then the next phase after that is called amend and clarify, where the proposer can amend and change their proposal and clarify why they've done that. They do not have to take in everybody's feedback. They do not have to agree with everybody's feedback. People may have made suggestions in the reaction phase that you're like, yeah, I hear you. That's not important to me and I'm not integrating it. That's totally fair. And then the last phase is objections. So as the team, we can object to doing the thing that's been proposed. And the bar for a valid objection is really high. A valid objection is one where we believe the proposal would sink the company so quickly that we could not react to it. So there are vanishingly few decisions that like fall into that category. Very, very few things that are like irreversible.
Thankfully,
and that's the point.
Thankfully.
Yeah. But in companies, we very often act like everything is like that, right? Like the bit of copy on the homepage, or, like what is our pricing strategy? All of these things, we act so precious about them. And so we're very slow to change them because we're scared. And so the idea of this objection phase is the vast majority of things are safe to try, right? We'll try it. Maybe it'll go wrong. We actually don't know what's going to happen. People are very bad at predicting what will happen. So let's not try to agree in our predictions. Let's just do it and see how it goes. And if we know that it's not going to sink the company, it's probably safe to at least try it.
How do you track all of these decisions? Is there, somebody makes a decision or wants to run an experiment and you're like, okay, I want to try copy that says this on the page. I want to run an experiment. Mm-hmm. Who tracks it? How do you convey what happened to the rest of the people on the team?
Yeah, so there's kind of two pieces to it. So our storage of all of our organizational knowledge and processes and so on is Notion. We have an internal Notion base, and all of the policies and proposals are in there, and everything that we've decided is in there. So that means that we'll actually follow the processes after we decide to do them. But to track the discussion as it goes along, we created a Slack workflow so that you can see in a channel that's called governance, what are the proposals that are currently being discussed, what phase are they in, and anybody can see what's being proposed and jump into them. So we're a very transparent company. And that means that anybody can, have reactions or have clarifying questions. And that's how we do it via Slack. It's where everybody is.
And I saw that you've made the Slack overview workflow public so that other people can take it also. That is really cool, I think, and I will link to that in the show notes because I just think that that's a really great thing. The other thing that's very unique about your decision-making, it's a very interesting process, but it's also done mostly asynchronously. It's all done on Slack. So I'm assuming with all these decision makings, you have tons of meetings, but that is not the case.
No, we do not. Yeah, we've done decision making synchronously. We often do it at our retreats when we get together in person. It's a good time to talk about sort of spicy things. But like I said, most things are not that spicy, not that high stakes. And so, yeah, we do it all via Slack, and it gives everybody the opportunity to both. To think with their slow brain, to see a proposal and really sit with it and be like, okay, well, what would that actually be like? And if I'm feeling, concerned about it or feeling negative about the suggestion, to tap into why am I feeling that? So slowing down the process so that people can actually think rather than kind of reacting purely from their gut also lets us make better decisions.
Yeah, indeed. Some things are good from the gut, but a lot of times you want to put a little thought into.
I think emotions are extremely important data, right? If you're like, oh, I feel angry about this, or I feel scared about this, that's very important information. But there's probably a layer or two deeper that tells us why do you feel that way? And that takes longer to kind of get to.
Right. Especially if you're caught up. I'm somebody, I get caught up. So it's if I'm mad, it takes me a little while to see through it. It's like a light switch, right? I have to wait till the light switch turns off and then I can, okay. So yeah, indeed. It's good to know about oneself, right? Because then you just have your systems that you put into place and all of that. Okay. So you mentioned something in passing that is interesting. You mentioned retreats. Mm-hmm. So your team has retreats, or it did before the pandemic, or how did it work and how does it work now?
Yeah. So before the pandemic, we would get together on a quarterly basis. The whole company was pretty small, so it was reasonable to do. And our last all company get together in person was in February 2020. We got very lucky to have done that right before the pandemic hit. And so at least that group of folks got to meet. But then, we're a fully global company. And so there's actually very few places in the world that all of us can even go to in this moment because of travel restrictions. So for about a year, we did virtual retreats, and I think we got pretty good at them. And that was both like doing work together as a whole company, reflecting on how we were doing as a company, using our own tool to reflect and build our retreat agenda. And then, actually working through different tensions in smaller groups. And we tried a lot of interesting things to get the like human bonding part of retreats to happen virtually. So we did things like we took a cooking class together. We learned how to make soup dumplings. That's a great experience because nobody's very good at it. And there's nothing more bonding than being bad at something together. So we did things like that, or like we shipped everybody a GPS, and then everybody went geocaching. So we took 2 days off, and we're just like, go out, go in nature, like experience the world, and just share pictures. And it was like surprisingly connecting to be like, oh, like that's what your part of the world looks like. Here's what my part of the world looks like. So we did those virtual retreats. About July of this year, we could tell the whole team was like, we got to get together. And as a leadership team, we really tried to figure out a way to do that, and came to the conclusion that there was just no way we were going to be able to get 20 people into any one spot and do it in a way that just the situation is changing so constantly. So it was like, how are we going to even like find a place that's that big? A lot of things are closed or booking up. And then what happens? It's a really big risk to plan something like that because, at the last minute, something could change. And so what we decided to do was to let the teams get together. So we had our product team get together in Mexico, and our sales team got together in Washington State just a couple weeks ago. And it was like actually a very good testament to doing these smaller things. While we were in Mexico, we had two of our folks were going back either to the UK or through the UK. And while we were there, the UK changed travel restrictions to put Mexico on the red list, I want to say. And so both of them had this like last minute scramble of like, oh God, I need to like change my travel plans and so on. So yes, smaller groups, even over full group meetings.
Yeah. I mean, it's the time for being creative about how we connect, and, the smaller groups, pros and cons to everything, right? So having the big, large retreat, pros and cons to having that as well. So, maybe there's more pros than cons, but okay. At the moment, we're all trying to sort of manage, like, what can we do with the resources that we have available to us right now? That's sort of the haiku in which we're all working. So, okay, interesting. So I know we're running out of time, but I have the last question, because as I was reading about your async decision-making, I saw that you guys also, you have working agreements about how you're going to work together. What do those look like? What did you use Notion to create them?
Yes, we use Notion, and there's a couple of versions of this. So we have a company directory in Notion, which is called the Souls directory. And in there, you put your personal API. So like, how do you personally like to work? So that's one set of sort of implicit agreements that are like, here's how I like to work. Mine is, I don't like to be contacted before or after work. You will hear from me when I'm back at work, is one of the things. So we have those, and then we have all of the policies about like how we're going to work together, which is everything from like, how are we going to do PR reviews to like, what's the working rhythm of each of the teams? Like, when do we meet? Each team has its own sort of like meeting cadence. So we decide together what that's going to be. To our hiring process is one of those working agreements. And, we have amended it as a group. If somebody feels like, oh, I don't like the questions that we're asking in the Fit for Org, I feel like they're, not really getting at what we want to be asking. They could submit a proposal. We went through an async decision-making process to change that set of questions. So they all sort of live in a table in Notion, and they're public to the whole company.
So one of the questions that I get all the time, and I'll pick your brain on this, is that you've got agreements that are organization-wide, and you've got agreements like, I mean, you've even got your individual agreements, like of this is how I like to work in there. If you're on several different teams and each team has its own way of working, how does that work? Do you just like get used to many different teams, or how do you guys solve that?
Yeah, I mean, so the only thing that's actually limited in the world so far is actual calendar synchronous time. So the only time that I've found that teams come into conflict is when we're trying to schedule a meeting for the same time. And when you're working with teams that are across the US and Europe, there's really about 2 hours of overlap in the US morning time. And those are like, very desirable times, because they're the times that are actually like okay for the US and okay for Europe to meet. Those are the only times that we've had to sort of like really coordinate between the two teams. The idea with how we structure our teams is teams should have sort of like autonomy. And that means that you have the expertise on the team to be able to deliver on your charter, your mission as a team, without having to coordinate with the other team. And the reason for that is that like, it lets you move faster, frankly. So, I, as a marketer, we have a designer on the growth team, and we're planning to hire developers on the growth team as well. And the reason for that is I don't want to have an argument with our product manager about like, well, is it more important to change the payment flow, or is it more important to add this other feature, right? Like for your needs, the feature is more important. For my needs, the payment flow is more important. So that's a silly argument to be getting into. We should each be able to like deliver on the things that we want to deliver on without having to have these discussions. So that's kind of how we try to do it, is to let the teams have as much autonomy as possible.
What happens when there's conflict? How do you resolve that?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes that's where a proposal will come in. So we describe ourselves as a tension-led company, which means that if anybody feels stress or feels tension or feels anxiety about something, then you propose what we should do about it. And so, for example, I could imagine a future where we have developers on our team and they redo the payment flow, and the product team is unhappy with maybe the quality of the code that's gotten into the code base. And so they would make a proposal for like, okay, I think that in order to resolve that we should have, somebody on the product team that's always the final review on any code that is merged into our main code base. And so like, that's the proposal. That's kind of the magic of that proposal phase, which is that like, if you have stress or conflict, then like you need to come up with an idea of how you might resolve that stress or conflict. And so you have the power to fix the things that bother you, basically.
What about if people just don't like each other?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, it sort of does. Well, we all really like each other. Is the thing. So to be
a team of 20, it can be really cozy. So yeah,
it's very cozy and nice. But the idea is like, it shouldn't sort of matter as long as we trust each other. We don't really need to agree on things, right? Like if we have sort of the same basic values and principles that we're working from, we don't. That's why we don't do consensus-based decision making, which is very like, we all need to agree. We all need to have the same perspective. That can often get into a place where you're kind of trying to like manipulate the other person or like convince them that your way is right. And that's where when people have power over each other, I think that's where a lot of conflict can happen. But if people have the power to shape the things that really matter to them, then that conflict becomes like a lot less stressful, a lot less spicy, and the sort of the energy of it gets diffused.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. I always have to ask because it's, everybody deals with it and people are really struggling. Like, how do we make it, how do we address it in a team? Because it comes up and you definitely do not want to let it linger because it like blows in weird fuses. So that's, you definitely.
I mean, I'll give you an example of like one proposal that got very spicy where there was like clearly a lot of disagreement on the team. So about a year ago, I made a proposal to like change our pricing in this kind of big way. And one of the folks on the product team like clearly disagreed with me, and he left a lot of comments, a lot of reactions, a lot of feedback. And I was just like, oh, this is really stressful for me. I'm really kind of overwhelmed by the amount of feedback. And what I got out of that process was ultimately I ended up making a much, much smaller change that was easier for us to say, well, that's safe. We can try that. Right. And it resolved my tension. And it sort of like sidestepped the issues, right? Because it doesn't actually, we don't need to agree on something. We just need to agree on what the next thing to do is. And the next thing is safe. Right. So in that example, like we went from, okay, we're going to change all of the pricing tiers and things to, we're going to offer a discount to resolve this really specific problem with the way our pricing is structured right now. And so it's sort of just like, it was conflict because we really disagreed, and it was intense because it was a strong disagreement. But we were able to move forward and to like do something that was good for our customers without having to like neither of us changed our minds, but we could still move forward.
Right. There was an agreement that you both agreed to that didn't require compromise necessarily on beliefs or values or what you were trying to do. Indeed.
Yeah,
moving the ball forward. Yeah, tough. I mean, it is really tough because, conflict is hard and disagreements are hard. And how do you,
Mhm.
if there's no boss saying this is how it's going to be,
Yeah.
then it's especially juicy to sort of get in there and really resolve it.
Yeah.
So, okay, final questions. I know we're really getting to the end of the time here. So with people in terms of setting up a new decision-making process on their teams, what advice do you have for people who are just starting out? Like, how would you start?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with consent-based decision-making because I think it's a really good framework. We didn't invent it. It's a thing in the world. And honestly, like it's going to feel awkward the first time you do it. It's probably the hardest thing for folks who join Parabol is like, well, I'm not used to this way of working. So I mean, not to always like promote our own stuff, but I would watch the video that we made about how this works. And then honestly, just try it. And the thing that's great about both consent-based decision-making and sort of our framework of, we have retrospectives every 2 weeks, is if something is not working, you can update it, right? So that's, I think, the most important thing is to not get bogged down in let's find the perfect process or the perfect way to do this, but rather like, how do we build in a way that we can fix whatever we're wrong about? Because you will be wrong about things, right? You have to be able to iterate on your processes. So that's what I would think about first.
That's a great. So just start and iterate. Don't worry about getting it perfect. It's not going to be perfect the first time. Like just forget that idea and get in the mud and just start wrestling. All right. So last question, which is if people want to learn more about you and of Parabol, where should they look? Where are you located online?
Yeah, well, the easiest place to find me is probably on Twitter. I'm at @pinch, _a_pinch. And Parabol is online at parabol.co, parabol.co.
Awesome. And I'll put all of that in the show notes just to make it easy access for anybody. Well, Aviva, I really appreciate you sharing how you work and some of the techniques that you guys use to make your remote team rock. I have taken copious notes, as you can see, so I'll put those all in the show notes. But thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for chatting about this. I love getting deep on decision making.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. I'm going to be looking more into that. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. And until next time, be powerful.